shameless. I don't think it's shameless, but I do want people to come to Finish Strong today. I prepared this really nice packet. We won't do the whole packet, I promise you. I won't keep you that long, but it's a good piece to take home and study on your own. There are books that sometimes catch your attention because of their title. And then there are books that catch your attention because who wrote them. Recently, I read a book by my cousin, Elliot Rudnicki. And the only reason why I read the book initially was because it was written by my cousin, Elliot Rudnicki. And while I was incredibly impressed by his vocabulary, I don't know so much about the book. I hope he's not watching. But the title of the book also caught me by surprise, and that was My Bubby is a Nazi. Wow! It's a mind blow, right? If I had the emoji, I would show you the picture of the head popping off. The book tells a complicated story about his step-grandmother on his father's side, which means the woman is in no way related to me. Just to be clear. But the first 4 chapters talk about his mother, who is my mother's first cousin. Okay, you following so far? Now, because my mother didn't have any sisters, and neither did my mother's cousin, and they grew up essentially down the block from each other, they were like sisters. And so Sandra was very much a part of our lives, Sandra and Robert. And so I loved the first 4 chapters because I learned things about my family I never knew that explained quite a bit about my family. But the story then goes on to talk about Grandma or Bubby Molly, who is the person who kind of married into the family. She learned Hebrew. She knew more about the holidays than anybody else, and she, in fact, put herself off as a Jew, marrying my cousin's grandfather, and lived her life as a Jew, was buried in a cemetery next to a Jew, and has a tombstone that has Hebrew on it, with her Hebrew name. Now, I don't want to give too much about the story away because maybe you should buy the book, although my cousin's doing just fine without it. The story is complicated, and the mystery surrounding her life makes for a fascinating book, though, strangely enough, you don't learn anything in the end other than she was German, and we have no idea what her participation was or lack of participation in the Holocaust was. The chapters moved me because they traced our family's history. He writes about relatives I knew only through fragments of stories that were sometimes told around our dining room table, but very rarely. And suddenly, some of these people came to life for me. Uncle Carl, Tante Mimi, were all people I knew. Tante Mushka, my daughter Mia, is named after. All making appearances in the book. And their dreams and their disappointments all came to life for me for the very first time because I only knew them when I was a very little child. I remember Tante Mushka's kisses on my eyes that left me soaked. But that's all I knew of Tante Mushka. And then I realized something profound in his book. I wasn't simply learning about them. I was learning about myself. because memory creates identity. And that's what this drash is all about this morning. The Torah understood the truth thousands of years ago, before psychologists, before historians began studying the power of memory. Moses tells the Jewish people, Rak hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od, pen tishkach et hadvarim ha'eleh, asher ra'u einecha, pen yasuru milvavecha, kol yemei chayecha, ve'odatem levanecha uvnei vanecha. Be careful. Watch carefully, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen. Make them known to your children and to your children's children. Tell the stories over and over again, says Moshe in this book of Deuteronomy, as he's beginning to bid farewell to the Jewish people. He says, remember. And maybe subtly he's saying, remember me. Don't forget the contribution I made. Notice what Moses fears. He doesn't fear military defeat. He doesn't fear economic collapse. He fears forgetfulness. Because when people forget its story, when the people forget its story, it begins to forget itself. Ramban Nachmanides explains that Moses is commanding more than a personal remembrance. He says, look beyond what Stein has said. Look at the national experience that shaped the Jewish people so that we can continue to remain for many generations. He says, those stories must be transmitted. That is the sacred inheritance passed along from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild. Memory isn't private property. Memory is responsibility. That is probably one of Judaism's greatest insights. Identity is not inherited only through blood, it's inherited through stories. We become who we are because someone tells us who we are. Every Passover, we gather around the table and we tell the story of our ancestors before us. Every Yom HaShoah, we remember names and lives that we refuse to allow to disappear. Every Yizkor service, we call back the voices of those who no longer speak but continue to shape us. We're people who tell stories because we understand that memory is how the soul survives. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs often observed that Jews were never held together only by geography. We lived in different continents. We spoke different languages. We ate different foods, but we're united by our story. We remember Abraham. We remember the moment at Sinai. We remember Jerusalem. We remember exile and redemption. The story gave us identity long before we had a homeland. That's why the Torah repeats the command to remember over and over again. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember Shabbat. Remember Sinai. Remember what Amalek did to us. Because memory is the soul's immune system. It protects us from becoming strangers to ourselves. And yet we live in a world where we preserve almost everything except for memory, except for our stories. We have thousands of photographs, but too few conversations. We save documents and files, but sometimes we fail to preserve wisdom. This most bizarre thing happened this past week. I paid a shiva call. And somebody was recalling the person who they had lost. They started telling stories about their sister, and it was a beautiful moment. And then one of the younger people in the room said something that bothered me so terribly. She said, "Stop talking. Pull out your phones and record the conversation. It bothered me. Because why can't we live in that moment and allow that story to enter us without being disrupted by technology? We know how to record moments, but we don't always know how to understand them. How many grandparents leave this world before anyone asks, what was your childhood like? Who shaped you? What sacrifices did you make? What lessons do you hope I carry forward? One of the greatest acts of tshuva may simply be to ask those questions. Call someone older. Sit with your parents. Visit with a grandparent. And listen. Because one day those stories will be no longer available. How many of you, like me, want to ask your parents a few more questions? I was reminded this week of this lesson, and it sticks with me. This week, the story that I heard, that I tell you now, how this young woman came back from having made Aliyah so that she could come to America again to care for her mother in her latest and last hours and days, putting her life on hold. We heard about her extraordinary kindness that she showed during her mother's treatments, and then ultimately her own. She would bring candy to the radiation and chemotherapy technicians because she wanted to know they were appreciated. We heard about her years in special education, working with children who had some of the greatest challenges, children who needed patience and compassion, and someone who believed in them. And then as I listened, I found myself thinking about something very painful. And that is, she died very young, at 65 years old. She was never married. She had no children. And so I wondered who was going to tell her story. Who will make sure that this remarkable life isn't forgotten? And the answer is those who knew her. You don't have to be a child to tell the stories. I told the story of my Tante Mushka. You don't have to be. So her sister, her brother, her nieces, her nephews, her friends sitting around the room are required now to tell her story. They now carry the responsibility of keeping her memory alive, of telling her story. Perhaps that's the deepest purpose of sitting Shiva. We often call people. We often think that when we pay a Shiva call, we're going because someone needs our presence. But there's another reason to go to pay a Shiva call. We go to hear the stories. The food at Shiva may be comforting, but the gathering of people is meaningful. The holiest thing that happens in the room is not the coffee and the cake, and it's not the conversations about the weather. It is the telling of a life. Because every time we tell a story about someone who has died, we push back against death itself. We say, when we tell their story, you mattered. Your kindness mattered. Your love mattered. Your life mattered. And we promise that your story will continue. But there's another question that we must ask. And that is, what's the story we're writing right now? Someday our children and our grandchildren will tell our stories. Will they remember only what we owned? Or will they remember what we valued? Will they remember our accomplishments? Or will they remember our character? Will they remember what we accumulated? Or how we loved? Every day, we are writing the stories someone else will someday tell. So I say, let us write them carefully. Eliot's book begins with someone trying desperately to erase her past. The Torah asks us to do the opposite. Don't hide your story. Don't erase your memories. Remember honestly. Remember gratefully. Remember faithfully. Because our memories, the joyful ones and even the painful ones, shape who we become. As we approach the high holidays, because Tisha B'Av is the moment in which we begin our preparation for the Yamim Noraim, we have to ask the deepest question of all, and that is, who am I? And the answers won't be found in what we have accomplished. It will be in the stories we remember, the stories we tell, the stories we pass on. And so I pray that may we become faithful guardians of memory. May we ask the questions that are critical before it's too late. May we tell the stories of those people who came before us. And then I pray, may we be worthy of being remembered. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Musaf, page 184.